So, today you will see what a terrible secret is hidden in the bowels of the earth. 1,750,000,000 years ago, there were 14 nuclear reactors here. Why does a person crave gold? We were genetically programmed. Who rode a bulldozer before our era? And among these dinosaur footprints, there are also paired footprints. And where did those who were called dietary supplements come from? This ancient artifact from the British Museum served as a starting point for the investigation of the most exciting mystery of ancient Egypt. The document, known as the Great Harris Papyrus, or the Will of Pharaoh Ramses III, describes the last will of the ruler, about the heir to the throne. But there are much more scientists for intrigues before our era. They wanted to find Pharaoh's treasures, but they were lucky in another way. The Turin Papyrus map, which is kept in Italy, shows the location of the mines where the gods mined gold and copper. This is a 15-kilometer section of Wadi Hamma, Mat in the Arabian desert, between the cities of Gift and Alcasar. Geologists and archaeologists went to the places indicated on the ancient map. They had indeed found ancient mines, but there was no gold there anymore. However, studies have so sensational results that scientists couldn't believe their eyes. It turned out that minerals in these ancient mines were mined tens of thousands of years ago, that is, when there could not have been any ancient Egypt yet, and ancient people had just climbed in from the trees and picked up sticks. Based on these discoveries, scientists have put forward the shocking idea that someone exhausted the bowels of our planet, long before people appeared on it. But the Egyptians got something. The ancient Egyptians definitely had a technology that we have yet to discover. And these technologies appeared much earlier than Pharaoh Ramesses. He was the heir to the by then almost forgotten art of construction, including underground shafts, mines, and mines. Alan Stanfield is the director of the New York Research Center, which studies archaeological anomalies. He descended deep into the mines mentioned in the ancient papyri, and he claims that the pharaohs inherited not only ancient mines, but also secret knowledge. They knew how to obtain and use, no less, monatomic gold, a masterpiece of nanotechnology. This gold has a fine structure and properties of modern science has studied recently. Monatomic gold has the appearance of a white powder. This gold, as a chemical preparation, increases attention, mental abilities, intuition. Where did tons of gold go? The ancients called gold aurum, consonant with sora. Gold has metaphysical properties that we don't use. The gods could even eat it to ensure their immortality. They needed a lot of gold. Scientists have analyzed hundreds of ancient Egyptian papyri. They say that the gods Ra, Aton, Horus, and the pharaohs of the ancient kingdom who imitated them radiated radiance in the sun. Experts have suggested that they applied gold dust to the skin to reflect infrared radiation. Moreover, monatomic gold was also used for food.
They ate the so-called white bread, the image of which can be found on any fresco in Egypt. The cones are like this. Why white bread? Because fine gold has such a light reflection coefficient that it looks almost white. Fine gold, is this nano probably already gold? It dissolves in the human body, unlike larger gold, and is not chemically pure.
But why did the gods, whoever they were, do this? Modern scientific experiments have helped to understand how monatomic gold works in the human body. Monatomy resonate with DNA helix short dismantle and assemble them in the correct way. According to the same principle, it is possible to disassemble and rebuild a crumbling house. This truly revolutionary discovery is already being used to treat the most serious diseases. Gold heals the body at the cellular level. But who in ancient times could use such knowledge and technology on our planet? How the ancient Egyptians made gold, which they were able to produce less than 10 years ago. How could our ancestors dig into the ground with very primitive tools? It's a mystery. Of course, you can use a shovel, but you can't dig deep. There is a technology that we have yet to discover. The technology that created these mines inside the earth. Earlier, in the early 70s of the last century, the Anglo-American Mining Corporation conducted a search for abandoned mines in the south of the African continent. This would allow the company to save quite a lot on exploration, and indeed, as expected, the ancient mines were found. However, their depth has become a real sensation for scientists. In the Nubian desert, when the loose gold and everything that lay on top was taken, mines up to 100 meters deep were found. It's all manual, all without mechanization, in general, a monstrous level of depth for that time. Analysis of animal bones and charcoal from these mines showed that their age is 50,000 years. This is the beginning of the late Paleolithic. The world's largest gold mine, Valery in South Africa, turned out to be even older. It was dated to the Upper Paleolithic. According to anthropologists and historians, the first representatives of Homo sapiens at that time sewed clothes from skins with bone needles and trained in firing primitive ceramics. Why would they develop mines on a global scale? 10,600 tons of gold were mined in the ancient world. Of these, the key countries for the extraction of this very gold were ancient Egypt, Sudan, the Spanish Iberian Peninsula, the territory of present-day Spain and Portugal, the Dacians, the territory of present-day Romania, then Bactria and Sogdiana. These are ancient states in Central Asia. Then India. Ththese are, perhaps, the main countries I named. They just gave these here a gigantic sum of gold. Who thousands of years ago conducted accurate geological exploration, had sufficient scientific knowledge and technical means for this. African tribes living from the Upper Nile to Lake Victoria tell legends about mysterious white people, the Bachwezi. They could fly, melt, or into metals. The Bachwezi disappeared as suddenly as they appeared. The Zulus, the indigenous inhabitants of South Africa, have preserved their legends. They believe that the first people created by the gods worked in the ancient mines. Where is the truth, and where is the fiction? However, recent scientific research in the field of genetics makes us take the legends of African tribes seriously. A concrete example, we, the people of the 21st century, are close to deciphering the human genome. That is, to decipher our genetic code. And in this code, we constantly come across relationships that we are not yet able to explain. It seems to me that many years ago, highly developed beings arrived on Earth, for whom gene technology was not a sealed book. They possessed methods that still seem to us to be science fiction. The Museum of Natural History in Vienna has an exhibit that serves as proof of the validity of this hypothesis. In ancient times, it seems that genetic experiments were carried out on Earth. A stone disc with a diameter of 22 centimeters was found in the jungles of Colombia. The artifact is at least 6,000 years old. Scientists have determined that its surface depicts the stages of development of the human fetus, starting from the moment of conception. The other side of the disc shows scenes of cell division. Experts called the artifact a genetic disc. Here you see this egg fertilized and unfertilized. There are spermatozoa here. On the reverse side, there are densely different stages of development. Here you see a man, a woman, a child. The disc is made of lyddite. This breed crumbles at the slightest mistake. How was it possible to pull out such a detailed image on the surface of the disc filigree, and without a microscope and a laser? A detailed analysis of the artifact led to an even more shocking conclusion. The disc was not made by hand, it is factory stamping. This is indicated by the outline of the drawings. What could genetic discs be made for? According to one version, this is an ancient visual aid on genetic engineering. Along with the disc was found tools, which we did not understand. We only suspect that they were used in medicine. It took scientists more than a century to solve the mystery of another artifact of Sumerian cuneiform tablets. Back in 1890, excavations were carried out on the territory of Iraq, where the ancient city of Nippur was found. More than 100,000 clay tablets were stored in the temple library of Nippur. The deciphering of ancient Sumerian Akkadian texts has begun. However, their content could be understood only at the end of the 20th century, when the latest discoveries in the field of genetic engineering were made. It turned out that the Sumerians described genetic experiments. It is reported that these deities were Anunnaki. They came to Earth from a planet that the Sumerians called. As a result, the Anunnaki created a man to work in the mines, specifically for gold mining. This probably happened for the first time about 200,000 years ago, before the flood. The civilization of the gods, call them the Anunnaki, whatever you want. She performed genetic modeling of evolving primates. According to this hypothesis, it is the mining past of all mankind that explains our love for gold. The craving for this metal is prescribed in people literally at the genetic level. The cult of gold has existed at all times and in all civilizations. The ancient Egyptians, Sumerians, Aztecs, Romans. We were genetically programmed. There is something inside of us that makes us crave gold. That's why people work hard to get gold. The Olympics are about striving for gold. Gold has a deep archetypal resonance with human consciousness. Modern genetics has proved that the creation of a new biological species is quite possible. But where did the Sumerians get this information from? Who knows, maybe the information that people were created for gold mining will also soon find indisputable confirmation. Why did the aliens need this gold? But for some technical purposes, but we will assume that gold now has a unique conductivity for contacts, and therefore, these very slaves, who are black-headed, as they are called in the Sumerian chronicles, they worked in the area of modern Mozambique and East Africa. There is another version based on the analysis of Sumerian myths. Anunnaki gold was necessary in order to support life on his own planet Nibiru. There was a gradual rarefaction of the atmosphere. To slow down this process, the Anunnaki sprayed gold-based chemicals into the planet's ozone layer. The Anunnaki came to extract gold from our land. They needed it for their planet. Today, everyone knows this version of the researcher Zachariah Sitchin. According to her, the atmosphere of the Anunnaki planet needed gold to protect it from the destructive rays of the sun. So they came here and made us mine gold for their civilization. Have historians and astronomers managed to get to the truth? Who were the powerful Anunnaki, and where is the planet that the Sumerians called Nibiru? The Old Testament also contains information about the contacts of earthlings with aliens who could fly, foresaw the future, and had incredible abilities. Thus, the biblical King Solomon, according to the sacred text, met with angels more than once. Even the names of these angels are indicated: Shimsiel, Sariel, and Michael. Who were they, and why is there so little information about these creatures? They did things that today seem to us like miracles from the fairy tales of the 1001 Nights. Here I can quote the famous writer and scientist Arthur C. Clarke, who said that any sufficiently advanced technology is almost indistinguishable from magic. In other words, it is clear why our ancestors took these alien beings for omnipotent gods, angels. What they were doing was unearthly. It was a miracle. At some point, these aliens apparently left Earth. Before the angels left the earth, the Jews seem to have given them some of the famous treasures of King Solomon. Scientists came to such an incredible conclusion when they translated the Treatise of Ships. Written in an ancient Hebrew manuscript, was discovered last year. It was studied by specialists of St. Andrew's University of Scotland. As is known from the Old Testament, the dishes, utensils, and even the table in the palace chambers of Solomon were made of pure gold. Gold, according to the Bible, covered the walls of the main sanctuary of the Jerusalem temple, built under Solomon. The precious metal was brought to Israel on ships from the mysterious biblical country of Ufur. The notorious country of Ufur, which everyone is looking for and still hasn't really found. Translated from ancient Chaldean, it is one of the Semitic languages, means wealth, treasures. The Treatise of Ships says that the lost treasures of King Solomon were hidden in the land of Israel and Babylonia, and most of the gold was taken by angels. Where did King Solomon get an unprecedented amount of gold? After all, there are no gold deposits on the territory of Judea. Maybe the ruler of the young Jewish state was helped to get the precious metals by his patrons, those whom the Holy Scripture calls angels. Gold is used more than 400 times in the Bible. This is practically one of the most commonly used words in the Bible, but if we take objects and metals, for metals, it's definitely number one. The mines of King Solomon have been exciting the imagination of scientists and adventurers of all stripes for many years. At the beginning of the last century, dozens of archaeologists, armed with a shovel and the Old Testament, went in search of gold-bearing copies. They were looking for where the ships loaded with gold were coming from to Israel. There is an opinion, of course, that it is located in Ethiopia. There is an opinion that it was almost in the Congo, that there were copies of King Solomon in South Africa. Now we have a short advertisement, but do not switch, because then you will see. See below, who drove a bulldozer past dinosaurs. This technique, well, only 15 million years ago. How were ancient temples built? There was equipment, but I think these people took it with them. And where was nuclear energy used before our era? 1,750,000,000 years ago, there were 14 nuclear reactors here. In the 2008 year in the Negev Desert, near the Dead Sea, archaeologists at a depth of 6 meters stumbled upon the entrance to the mine. It turned out that these were the workings of the 10th century BC. Just at that time, according to the Old Testament, the biblical King Solomon ruled. Scientists have suggested that copies of King Solomon have finally been found. But what actually scientists found? Red mountains, completely unearthly, rather Martian plan. And there are really quite a lot of wells, quite a lot of narrow holes like this. Here. But what did I find out? A few thousand years ago, the Egyptians mined copper there after all. Whether gold was mined there or not, I don't know. But it's called, for some reason, they're hoarding King Solomon. The search for ancient gold-bearing veins in the 30s and 40s of the last century was carried out by the German geologist Heinrich Quiring. He has mastered 5 ancient languages perfectly. This is what helped the scientists to find the lost mines on the territory of the Arabian Peninsula. Quiring himself was convinced that King Solomon's mines were located there, and not in Africa at all. The mysterious name Ma'at ad-Dahab, difficult to pronounce. When he translated, it turned out that in translation, it means the cradle of gold. Naturally, the geologist visited it closer to Yemen, now Saudi Arabia. I visited this very cradle of gold, found there dozens and hundreds and thousands of ancient workings in a gigantic space. He also calculated approximately the amount of gold mined. It turned out that 35 to 40 tons of gold were mined only from this place. Ancient mines that go deep underground have been found today in the Balkans, India, Central and South America, in the Urals, the Kola Peninsula, and Siberia, which leads researchers to a scandalous assumption. Really, in the distant past, the Earth was a giant resource base for mining. It is really necessary to study every cave, every mining operation like this. And there was this subway-type tunnel of some kind, or it was an ancient mining mine. This is probably only detailed research will tell. But nevertheless, I have seen in the north of Bulgaria such a tunnel through the mountain, huge, which was shown quite often in the movie Conan. And it really, most likely, was also a man-made tunnel. Lebedinsky iron or deposit in the Belgorod region. Open pit or mining is conducted here in the middle of the last century. The rotary excavator chooses a beard. He leaves his signature mark, forming a quarry with large yars. The magnetic mountain in the Urals, the Cheremshin nickel mines, and hundreds of other modern open-pit mines around the world also look like this. And now compare. These are already mountain terraces in Latin America, which the Incas used to grow crops. It is believed that terraces are a natural formation. But is it so? Doesn't it look like the work of a modern rotary excavator, who could handle the rock at an altitude of many thousands of meters above sea level? Maybe to those who built ancient structures preserved in the Western Hemisphere. Tiwanaku in Bolivia, Machu Picchu in Peru, all these houses and temples testify to the use of heavy-duty technology. What I think is reliable and what motivates me to believe that there were visits after all is a structure in Latin America, when supermodern cuts were made on Tiwanaku, in the area of Lake Titicaca, and so on. Machu Picchu, where it's just proven that. Official science tries to hush up these facts, but they can no longer be silenced. There absolutely must be modern stone-cutting equipment to get such accuracy and such perfection at the right time. That is, there was equipment, but I think these people took it with them, because it would have been found a long time ago. What technologies did the civilization possess that developed ancient mines on our planet? Did powerful machinery like modern rotary excavators and cranes ever move on the ground? But some researchers put forward bolder hypotheses. Nuclear reactors operated on Earth, and experts have proof of this. In the early 70s, in the African state of Gabon, by the French company mined uranium ore. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the content of fissionable uranium-235 in the samples was significantly lower than expected. Then they began to investigate whether this uranium had already been used by someone. And it turned out that the uranium deposit in Gabon has such outlines that, taking into account the half-life of uranium, allow us to conclude that almost 1.2 billion years ago, or rather 1.750 billion years ago. There were 14 nuclear reactors here. All this has been calculated by physicists with great accuracy. But the question arises, who could have created a nuclear reactor so many years ago? These pictures were taken in the Phrygian Valley, on the territory of Turkey. Candidate of Geological and Mineralogical Sciences, Alexander Kaltipin, conducted field research there. His group studied ancient underground complexes. But the attention of scientists was attracted by traces on the surface of the valley. It turned out that the Phrygian plateau is crossed by deep ruts, which very much resemble the tracks of vehicles. When we first saw you riding on the car Fiat, and it was the first time, until the tracks were shallow, for these two fresh tracks. Then, when the tracks became deeper, we could not pass, got out and began to study. It turned out that there are a lot of such traces. They intersect each other, they round off. Whole fields are formed in places, where there are dozens and several dozen traces. And the most interesting thing is that next to these tracks, we found some rectangular depressions. What interested geologists so much? Why did the footprints in the Phrygian Valley become an object of study? It turns out that the deep ruts left in the so-called neogene surface alignment on a plateau that was formed 15 million years ago. For historians, this is a deep antiquity. It is generally believed that no vehicles traveled on Earth then. But how to explain the origin of the mysterious traces? What kind of transport traveled through the Phrygian Valley? Specialists are now studying all the dynamics of pressure on the ground, the degree of its deformation, the distance between the ruts. And the first conclusion has already been received. The size of the wheels was about 1 meter. Now there is an assumption that maybe it was even a little smaller, but not less than half a meter. There is an assumption that there was a type of propeller in front, which allowed, as it were, to scatter the soil to the side. Because it is such a viscous soil, after the flood it may have been, which scattered to the side and did these sediments. What kind of flood are we talking about? And why did the transport have to travel on viscous soil? Scientists know that just 15 million years ago, there was a giant flood on Earth. This is evidenced by serious geological changes. At the turn of the early and middle Miocene, the African and Eurasian plates collided. Part of the territories of Turkey, the Mediterranean, and the Crimea were brought to the surface from the ocean. Surprisingly, further research showed that the footprints imprinted on wet limestone and tuff were preserved not only in the African Valley. Vehicle tracks have been found in Malta, Spain, Italy, Bulgaria, in the Crimea, in Chufut-Kale and Bakhchisar. Critics of this hypothesis say that the traces could have been left much later. Maybe, indeed, ordinary carts drove along the Crimean roads, but then the nature of the tracks would have been completely different. I studied for a very long time. I walked along almost all the ruts in Chufut-Kale and Veckerman. There are very hard limestones there. They mean that these are soft rocks that the cart will pass and traces will remain. They do not pull at all. In addition, there, as well as in the Phrygian Valley, mud was squeezed out on both sides in some places. Another find confirming this scientific version was made in Brazil, in the Amazon. There, archaeologists studied the parking lot of ancient dinosaurs. Unexpectedly, next to the tracks of animals that died out 65 million years ago, smooth ruts were discovered, which could only be left by a technique similar to modern ones. There are a lot of dinosaur tracks there, and they are 140 million years old. And among these dinosaur tracks, there are the same paired tracks, fossilized, in such red soil, traces of wheels. This technique not only existed 15 million years ago, but 140 million years ago, there could have been a wheeled one, and that we live on a land that has already been inhabited many times before. Now we have a short advertisement, but do not switch, because then you will see. See below. How did nanotechnology turn out to be in ancient Siberia? The age of these objects is about 300,000 years. Who scattered high-tech spare parts in the Urals. They are not found anywhere in the skin of modern UFOs. And what was mined in the far north a million years ago? Similar workings are located in Yakutia. In 1993 year, an object in the south of the Chelyabinsk region attracted the attention of geologists. The pit is up to 7 meters deep, with a diameter of up to 50. In ancient times, Bashkirs and Kazakhs living in these parts used this huge pit as a temporary pen for cattle stolen from neighboring tribes. Therefore, the place is still called the Thieves' Pit. The staff of the Institute of Mineralogy of the Ural branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences investigated this object. It turned out to be an ancient copper mine. Over the past decades, more than 20 similar requested workings have been found in the southern Urals. Before, experts simply did not pay attention to them. Scientists calculated that 80,000 tons of ore were obtained from these mines, 4,000 tons of copper were smelted. But who and when mined or here on an industrial scale? Radiocarbon dating is not to do because he was under the influence of the natural solar radiation. The tests have to be completely different. Naturally, he has already absorbed solar radiation. According to the legends, it is also very difficult, in fact, to classify. The circumpolar Urals. Numerous mounds are clearly visible from a bird's-eye view. This is recycled slag. In the north of the Urals, copper ore, diamonds, and rare earth elements have been actively mined in recent centuries. But in none of the cases is such a method of extraction used. Where did the mounds of processed ore come from? When I talk to archaeologists, when I just started to deal with the topic, they say that it was a glacier going. And so this is all heaped up, heaps such as an excavator. Well, you know, if the glacier still went and raked like that, it probably wouldn't have raked a single pile. At least there would be some kind of strip mixed with large stones. And here you can see that this is exactly what some kind of development has been poured. Who left the processed ore on the surface? What unknown method of mining was used by ancient miners? Official science prefers not to investigate this issue, but there are more and more facts that require explanation. It seems that ore was mined in this way not only in the circumpolar region, but also in Siberia. Similar workings are found in Yakutia, that is, whole mounds of bulk. Perhaps, yes, really from the environment of some or ancient mines, or some. But this is clearly not an explosion, because, at least an explosion, it should leave a funnel. If you look for these mines, then you probably need to look for them, most likely, at the bottom. Because if we take a modern mine, how is a modern mine built? That is, a trunk is being built, and then such a dump is poured around the mine. Over time, of course, the mine may tighten. Archaeological finds brought to the surface from mines near the eastern border of the Ural Mountains have only added to the questions. Have tiny spiral-shaped artifacts been investigated by world-renowned scientists? The artifacts turned out to be similar to parts of modern satellites or rockets. But how did they get into the ground? The depth of occurrence was recorded. It was 12 meters, which means the age of the finds is 300,000 years. In the Urals, on the small Narada River, gold prospectors accidentally stumbled upon tens of thousands of tiny spiral-shaped artifacts. The largest of them are only 3 centimeters. The smallest ones are hundredths, 3/100ths of a millimeter, and it's better to look at them under a microscope. It was found that these artifacts consist of rare metals tungsten and molybdenum. But the biggest surprise, and this was confirmed by an examination in one of the Moscow institutes, was the age of these objects, about 300,000 years. Question: who could have made these amazing things at a time when our distant ancestors ran around the earth, all covered with wool? Similar tiny details created from rare earth element alloys literally fell from the sky in the 20th century. On November 29th, 1986, hundreds of people witnessed a UFO crash in the city of Dalnogorsk. Metal balls and nets were found at the scene of the accident. Scientists have found that they were created using lanthanum, scandy, and tri. Geologist Alexander Hurwitz investigated the find. He believes that the details were made from rare earth elements mined in the mines of the Kola Peninsula in Lobozersky district of Toul. Moreover, the development of these deposits has been going on for tens of thousands of years. It is likely that these are old quarries in which the development of those very rare earths was carried out, which are now found not anywhere, but in the skin of modern UFOs. The Lovozersk tundra mountain range was formed 350 million years ago. There was an active volcano here. The frozen lava began to crack and formed numerous canyons and gorges. Literally thrown to the surface of the earth were hundreds of types of minerals, including rare earth elements. The development of unique mines began back in the 20s of the last century, but it turned out that someone had already developed some mountain circuses. And it happened a long time ago, after the last ice age, when the Kola Peninsula was freed from ice. This is eloquently evidenced by the surface of 4 mountain circuses, including Uvarov. Its edges are not smooth with hinged glaciers. A hinged glacier is a glacier that slides down and works off the circus wall. In other words, these steep walls are being worked out by a glacier, and so the edges should be smoothed out. Do you understand? And they are like this. Here you can sit on the edge, hanging your legs there, and there the depth will be 500 meters. To whom 1,000 years ago might need rare earth elements. They form refractories and oxides. Experts say that even modern science has not yet revealed all the possibilities of this group of metals. It means that 1,000 years ago, someone already used them in the space, aviation, and military industries. I have almost no doubt that there were some visits to Earth. I think that space is inhabited after all. The Earth cannot be an exception when there are trillions of stars and millions of solar systems. But who worked on the ancient workings thousands and even millions of years ago. According to one hypothesis, the aliens collaborated not only with representatives of Homo sapiens, but also with those who inhabited this planet long before us. Now we have a short advertisement, but do not switch, because then you will see.
Сейчас у нас короткая реклама, но не переключайтесь, потому что далее вы увидите.
See below. Who created the dwarves, and where did they go? It was they who walked along the pond, along the rich ore, and chose the richest deposits. Where did the underground tunnels come from on Mars? They live in the so-called Martian channels. What did the ancient people know about the fate of the gods? In fact, a civilization on 2 planets is dying. Indigenous peoples living on the territory of the Perm territory and the Sverdlovsk region tell legends about the miracle of the white-eyed. According to legends, these stunted creatures lived in the mountains, mined ore and processed precious stones since ancient times. And then the gnome-like creatures went into caves deep into the earth. These stories could be classified as folklore, if not for the real findings of geologists. When I was a first-year student of the Geological Exploration Institute, we were told in the first year that when geologists explored the Urals for copper, or they said that all the large copper deposits were on the site of old copper workings that were attributed to a miracle, a mythical dwarf people who lived underground. I met about the same thing when we worked in Central Asia, in Tenshin. And there are like foxholes there, which are very difficult to get into. The people were quite interesting and strange. From here, by the way, came the wonderful, Chudi, and there was such a nation. It was somehow isolated, had incomprehensible knowledge. a little bit mined or long before the appearance of the first representatives of our civilization in the Urals. Moreover, the mining operations were not carried out at random. Modern geologists can only envy the scientific knowledge possessed by the ancient dwarfs. Some mythical dwarf people, if they mined copper, they mined silver, perhaps gold. And they were very purposeful. It's not like some huge rock mass was mined. They went through the ore, the rich ore, and chose the richest deposits. Who were the ancient geologists? And can representatives of a highly developed civilization, those who were called gods, come to our planet again? Coincidence or not, most ancient peoples believed in the imminent return of their gods. The Maya Indians were waiting for the arrival of the god Quetzalcoatl. The inhabitants of Tibet believed that their deity named Gokar would descend to earth. Ancient texts say directly that all the knowledge possessed by the priests of ancient Egypt, they were obtained in a complete form from the hands of a certain highly developed civilization. Moreover, ancient texts contain information indicating not only the location of this civilization, even indicating the names of planets and orbit numbers. They also talk about the level of development of that civilization. The ancient Sumerians seem to know the history and geography of the solar system best of all. They wrote down a lot of information. Today, scientists have just begun to decipher the layer of information stored on clay cuneiform tablets. If we evaluate the state of the solar system in accordance with ancient texts, we can say that relatively recently, from a historical point of view, or from the point of view of geological time, some 18 to 19,000 years ago, our solar system had a completely different geography, and there were at least 3 planets in the atmospheres of which life existed. There was the mind. And on 2 of them, civilization was at a very high level of development. In this case, I'm talking about the planet Mars and the planet Phaidon. Researcher Valery Uvarov believes that the planet Mars is called Nibiru by the Sumerians in their texts. They recorded information about the death of life on its surface. A Phaidon in ancient Sumerian. This is Tiamat. The inhabitants of these 2 planets last visited the Earth. Gold, copper, uranium, rare earth elements. The course of events, according to this hypothesis, was disrupted by a catastrophe. A stream of meteorites came through the solar system. In fact, civilizations on 2 planets are dying. Phaidon is completely broken, or as the Sumerian text Tiamat says about it, and Mars, aka Nibiru, is dying. And this leads the solar system to a complete chaotic state. Did the inhabitants of Mars and Phaidon manage to escape if these planets really survived a cosmic catastrophe? Have those who have been siphoning off the Earth's resources for thousands of years survived? According to one version, these resources helped space geologists to get to the most distant planet of our solar system and make it their new home. And ancient texts tell us that they were fleetingly, literally, if not overnight, forced to leave these planets for a pre-prepared planet behind the sun. Several civilizations participated in this, which is extremely important, in order to comprehend the processes taking place in the solar system at that time. The planet behind the sun is called Marduk in ancient Sumerian texts. The ancient Egyptians also knew about the existence of this celestial body. They called it the Anti-Earth. Incredibly, these days this information has almost been confirmed. It turned out that the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians had an accurate knowledge of astronomy. In 1672, the director of the Paris Observatory, Giovanni Domenico Cassini, discovered a new planet near Venus. It is supposedly located behind the Sun, in the same orbit as the Earth. However, so far this remains only one of the untested hypotheses. Is the rest of the information left by the Sumerians really true? Can the inhabitants of the anti-Earth, IDS Sumerian Marduk, return to our planet again? What if the aliens need Earth's minerals again? Researchers have studied hundreds of ancient texts, and it is written everywhere. The gods promise to return. This neighborhood in the very near future will play a decisive role in the evolution of the consciousness of Earthlings, because we will not only see how they appear, but we will also realize their existence, and moreover, we will receive information. We will be able to realize about the preserved texts telling about the prehistory of our civilization.
Мы получим информацию, мы сможем осознать сохранившиеся тексты, рассказывающие о предыстории нашей цивилизации.
And this will be a very serious incentive for changes. It seems that thousands of years ago, the Earth was left at our complete disposal. And we are convinced that gold, oil, diamonds, iron ores are our indisputable property. People are used to living off the planet's resources. But what if we have to share them? With those who believe that Earthlings are not the masters of this planet at all, but just good miners.
неплохие шахтеры.